ran an ad in the Wall Street Journal, $250 display ad, TRS-80, best prices in the USA. Call 201-228-7555. The next day I came in, the phone never stopped ringing again. Within 6 months, we were running $1 million company, and he had all the cash he needed to pay his SBA loan and then some. We grew that company to be about a $20 million, actually almost up to $24 million a year company.
Many people have great ideas, but the truth is, ideas don't build wealth. Execution does. Today, we've got Marc Daniels, known as the Billion-Dollar Coach, a globally recognized business strategist who helps entrepreneurs turn vision into growth. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. He has decades of experience guiding companies across 16 countries. He's driven ventures from startup to multi-million-dollar exits. Through his Strategic Planning Academy and hands-on coaching, Marc equips leaders to spot emerging trends, execute with precision, and achieve lasting results. In this episode, we'll unpack the execution formula that anyone can use to go from planning to real results, regardless of whether or not you're a business owner. If you've ever felt stuck between vision and outcomes, this conversation will give you the structure, mindset, and rhythm to finally bridge the gap and create your life of harmony. Let's meet Marc and see how it's done. Welcome to Richer Soul, Marc Daniels. It's great to have you join us today.
Hi, Rocky. Thank you for having me.
I am excited for the conversation, and I'm excited to learn from you today. Let's start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
I learned a lot about money early on. I grew up in a household in the 60s where my dad went off to work in the morning and my mother was a stay-at-home mom. Things were very, very tight. A small, wonderful little town, Oakland, New Jersey. My dad would drive off to work in the morning. He managed a record store, and we were always financially struggling. Dinner was Kraft macaroni and cheese and hot dogs. But early on, and I forget the exact age, I started to make money. And like most kids, it was first cutting lawns or doing things like that. But then I picked up a route where I was delivering TV guides. Many of today's listeners don't even know what a TV guide was. But before you could Google what was going to be on TV, or before you could click the channel guide on your cable listing there, the only way to find out what was coming on TV was a TV guide. And I delivered them door to door in Oakland, New Jersey once a week. And that led to a paper route. And it was the Patterson Morning News. They would not let you have more than 200 subscribers. But I bought another route, probably my first acquisition, from another guy called Gary, and he had a route of about 100. So I was literally delivering about 275 newspapers every single morning. Early on, too young to work at the restaurant, but I got a job washing the owner's car and subsequently ended up working in that restaurant for him for many years. Growing up, when my father needed new tires for his car, I bought them because I was afraid he would crash and die because his tires were bald. My mother eventually went to work and actually ended up getting a college education. And she actually graduated the same year I did from college. So growing up was a wonderful town. It was a great time to grow up in the 60s. I probably was 60s and 70s. Although as I got into high school, of course, I was aware of some of the challenges the world was facing at that time, which were pretty extensive. That was growing up, and I learned early I had to make money.
So they didn't actually teach you about money. No,
I taught myself about money.
It's amazing how a paper route will do that for you.
Yeah. Got up early, had to fold the papers. They were banded together, and it was challenging work. I got kicked out of high school because my freshman year, and this is one of the mistakes I made in my life, but I was buying a pack of cigarettes for the girl who took home attendance and telling her to mark me down as present, and I'd be about an hour late because I was delivering newspapers. I got kicked out of school, and they charged me with damaging state records. It was like a state and federal offense. Nevertheless, shortly after that, I had to stop delivering newspapers. Yeah, that's a true story.
So did you end up going to a different school, or what happened?
No, I got kicked out I got expelled for like a week, and they were very upset because I was literally messing with the state and federal records of attendance. I remember being driven home in a police car.
It's funny how things used to be.
Yes.
But back then they didn't, yes, they cared that you were late, but you could still be late every day and graduate, couldn't you?
I could be, but you had a certain amount of latenesses that you were allowed in high school. So they'd give you whatever it was, 8, 9, 10, and after that I didn't need to be there for homeroom. All I did in homeroom was take attendance.
So once you got through high school, did you go to college?
I went to college. I won a scholarship for doing a television commercial about the energy crisis. Probably too long of a story, but you used to have to wait in gas lines in the 70s to get gas.
Odd even day, like depending on your license plate.
Yes, you're right. It was odd even. The theme for the state-run contest run by the public broadcasting system about the energy crisis. So real quickly, I had a guy on one end of the sofa, girl on the other end of the sofa. Guy looked nervously over at the girl, turned off the light, moved a little bit closer to her, reached around, turned off the other light. The screen went to black and it said, "Enjoy the energy crisis. Turn off all unnecessary lights." And I won first place in the state and got a very small scholarship to a state school that enabled me to get going with my college education. I went to William Patterson State University in Wayne, New Jersey. My original major was actually television and film production.
Did you go into television when you graduated, or?
No, and that's an interesting story. So when I was 19, I was driving along. I had saved up a lot of money. I was working as a lifeguard during the summer. I was working at 2 restaurants. I was working at the film library on campus and going to college. And somehow I pulled all that off, and I had saved just shy of $20,000.
Wow.
Which was a lot of money back then. It was about $18,000 I had in the bank. And there was a house on Upper Greenwood Lake, New York, which had caught fire and was going for bank auction. So I went up and looked at it, and I said, man, maybe I could get this. I checked around, and everybody said, oh, that'll go for about $15K at auction. So I got out of work one night about 11 o'clock at night, called my girlfriend, and I said, let's drive up to Greenwood Lake, New York and look at that house. She said, well, you've already looked at it twice. I said, it goes on bank auction on Monday. I want to look at it one more time. So I drove up there, and we walked around the house in the dark with flashlights, got back in the car and started to head home. For whatever reason, I turned to her and I said, make sure your seatbelt's on. Back then, you could put on 2 seatbelts, your lap belt and your shoulder belt. Not all cars came with a belt that came across your shoulder, believe it or not. And we were coming around a corner. A drunk driver in a Suburban drove up and over my Opel GT and hit me head on. Dead silence. I woke up. She was there in the car with me. Her name was Marianne. And I said, are you okay? And she said, yeah, I think I'm okay. And she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." And I reached up, and my shoulder, with the bone was just sticking out of my shoulder. My arm was literally hanging by the arm, and I was bleeding profusely. And I said, "No, I'm not okay." So she somehow got herself out of the window and started to walk away to get help. And as she walked away, blood started to come out of the corner of my mouth. And in desperation, I tried to call her back because I thought I was going to check out. I thought that was it. And every time I called her name, just blood would spurt out of my mouth. My lung had been crushed, not punctured, but literally crushed from the impact. And it was ripped inside. They call it a contused lung, but so contused that the fibers had just ripped. So I was bleeding quite extensively into the one lung. And, I know the type of podcast you run, Rocky, so I'm not going to swear, but I swore to the Lord. I said, "Oh God, I didn't want to beeping die this way." And with that, no more than 30 seconds later, an angel appeared. It was a gentleman who worked for the Mawa First Aid Squad. He announced himself. He said he was visiting his sister, and he needed my permission to get me out of the car because if he didn't, I was going to die. I was going to bleed out. And he struggled to get me out of the car. I remember him saying, "Oh, you're seatbelted in. That's why I can't get you out." And he drugged me out, and he sat on me, literally his body weight on top of my shoulder, until the ambulance arrived. I woke up 3 days later. The doctors came in short time after I woke up in intensive care and said, "We saved your arm, but we don't know if you're going to have full use of it." Almost full use of it. So that was a defining moment in my life. At 19 years old, I certainly didn't realize at 19 how short life was. I probably didn't realize how precious life was. And it really changed who I was greatly. People look back and say, "Oh, that's terrible that happened to you." It may have very well been the best thing that ever happened to me because it gave me such a purpose and motivation in life to achieve more, to embrace every moment, to help other people. And that's really was a defining moment in my life.
That's powerful. Sometimes we need defining moments, and other times we can just define a moment and say, we're going to actually live life the way we should live life. You all get a choice. If you want to go through hardship, go through hardship. If you want to take the easy route, choose today, right?
So did I graduate with a major in television or film? No. I switched my major to accounting and finance because I felt I needed to get a job that would really generate income. At that time, film and TV was, and still to this day, it's a very challenging industry to break into. And I wanted something that was more definitive and more sure. And did I hate accounting? I couldn't stand accounting. But I started as an intern in West Milford, New Jersey in 1978, helping a guy run his Radio Shack dealership. And Joe was the owner of the shop. He had just acquired this company, Radio Shack dealership. And I did the financial projections for him, and I sat down with him. I said, "Joe, you're going to be out of business in 6 months." Now, the economy at that time was really a mess. It was during a period that we call stagflation, and interest rates were 18%. There's a lot of money in the economy, but inflation was rising at a rapid pace. So people were not buying a new stereo for their car or a new television for their home. They were just trying to put food on the table because the cost of food had gotten so expensive. The economy was really messed up. In that area, particularly, Ford Mawa, the second largest auto manufacturing plant in the world, had closed down. Jungle Habitat, which was owned by Warner Brothers, had closed down and sold off all their animals to Great Six Flags, which didn't even open for 2 or 3 years after that. The construction workers were all out of work. The drinking age in New Jersey used to be 21, but in the drinking age in New York State, where West Milford bordered Greenwood Lake, New York, was 18. But all of a sudden, New Jersey, because of all the young men that had just died in Vietnam, decided to change the drinking age to 18. So now the bars were even failing. The economy was totally destroyed in West Milford. Roughly 40% of people were out of work. Ford Mawa, Jungle Habitat, bar owners, restaurant owners, and they were also facing stagflation, incredible increases in grocery prices and whatnot. So I said, Joe, you're going to be out of business in 6 months. And he said, you're wrong. Rework the numbers. I reworked the numbers. I met with him the next day. I said, you're right. I was wrong. You're going to be out of business in 4 months. And the next weekend, we went to a Radio Shack convention somewhere along in the Hudson River Valley, Holiday Inn or some small convention center like that. And it was all Radio Shack dealers. Radio Shack used to franchise about 15% of the stores were Radio Shack franchisees. And every franchise dealer was complaining about this company in Texas called Pan American Electronics that was selling TRS-80 Model 1 computers at a discount. Oh, Lord. So I grabbed Joe and I said, I got an answer to our problems. And he didn't want to do it at first. So I did it myself, but I ran an ad in the Wall Street Journal, $250 display ad, TRS-80, best prices in the USA. Call 201-728-7555. The next day I came in, the phone never stopped ringing again. Within 6 months, we were running $1 million company. And he had all the cash he needed to pay his SBA loan and then some. We grew that company to be about a $20 million, actually almost up to $24 million a year company. And we're basically riding a trend, this amazing trend of computers.
And that is a big key. People don't realize when you ride a trend, you can be horrific at what you do, but you're technically lucky because you're riding a trend until the trend ends. And we'll get to that because I'm sure you've dealt with trends ending over time.
Oh, I did. I've dealt with lots of trends ending.
But I think this is where people get a bit arrogant and they don't realize, hey, you just happen to catch a trend. You're not all that. And God bless you if you do. And at the same point, if you see a trend and you can hop on, go for it. But just understand it's temporary.
Yeah, it's always very, very temporary. We rode that trend for about 3 or 4 years. At that time, you have to remember, there were no computer stores. There wasn't computer stores. You could only buy computers at flea markets, computer markets. And so I went on the trade show route for many years, flying into different cities to do computer show. But then stores started to open up. And it wasn't just Radio Shack stores. Apple eventually opened up stores, and there were so many different computer chains back then. And then there were other people entering the market: IBM, Compaq, K-Pro, Atari. Everybody was coming out with computers left and right. Compaq, just on and on and on. So the margins started to really slip, and it became very challenging. The one thing that really helped me at that point in time, and you mentioned it, you said, I got lucky. Yeah, I got really lucky. But all of a sudden I'm running $1 million company and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Let's be frank. I was lucky. So I started to read every book I could. I read books on how to hire the right employee. I read books on how to motivate people. I read Albert Humphrey's book that came out in the 60s about a SWOT analysis. I read everything I could I became a study of running businesses. And to this day, I still read significantly. So, I had to learn a lot really quickly. But then and I started to do a yearly plan. And during one of the planning sessions, we saw that our margins had dropped from 15% to 14% to 13 to 12 to 8% margins. And I said, let's do an analysis. And that's what people, they either get lazy or they don't continue to plan on a regular basis. A lot of people think you can put together a plan at the beginning of the year and that's it. Well, maybe during Rockefeller's days you could, Today technology and everything's moving so fast that you have to be always adjusting your plan. You should be looking at it at least every quarter and adjusting it accordingly. So what we noticed was that when somebody called us and said, I need a system built for a specific need, let's say they were an architect. Well, if they were an architect, they needed a $5,000 plotter. If they were a lawyer, they needed to buy a piece of software called Westlaw, which sold for $5,000. If they were a desktop publisher, they had to buy a large screen, a video card that would run that large screen, and a piece of software called PageMaker or Quark Express that sold for $4,000. The monitor was $5,000. The video card was $1,000. So these $20,000 systems that we were building were where the profit were. So what did we do? We followed that trend. We changed our name from Computer Discount of America to CDA Computer Sales and started to make money again. So that was again following another trend because you couldn't buy a computer out of the box like you could today. You can buy any Mac today and you do desktop publishing on it. You can buy any IBM or any PC-based product right out of the box, Dell, and do PageMaker and do videos and do whatever you want on it. Back then you couldn't. So that was the next really trend that we had to follow. Let's build systems. So that was a trend that I rode. Now, during that period of time, just to step back, I was doing computer shows all over the place. In 1978, I stood on the same trade show floor with Stephen Jobs and Wozniak, 79 that probably was, at the computer fair in San Francisco. A year later, I went to a party sponsored by one of the early magazines, whether it was Computer World or Mac World or one of them, and stood on a boat. And a guy walked up to me and said, so what do you do? And I was talking to him and I said, what do you do? He said, well, I'm a lawyer. He said, yeah, my name is Bill Gates. And I had just told him that I started out in business selling Tirus 80s. And he said, my son wrote some of the software for that. In fact, he just started a little company that you may be heard of called Microsoft. Well, I got to tell you, this guy went on and on about his son and how proud he was of his son. And I remember that trip very explicitly. Another person I met that day on the same boat was Dennis Hayes, who had just created this modem that had lights on the front of it that told you how fast your data was transferring. Like, think about it. Like now we plug it in and boom, we know we're connected to the internet, right? Or we grab a Wi-Fi signal. So these early days in computers were really interesting. But by 91, the margins had gone away again. And I ended up selling off what was left of that company and getting out of computers in 1991.
Interesting journey. When you met all of those people, did you expect them to end up where they did?
Yes and no. I didn't really think about it much then, Rocky, to be honest with you. But, looking back now, I know Dennis Hayes. I don't want to be judgmental in any way, but I know he went through a divorce. I know he went through a financial failure, whereas other people like Bill Gates' son went on to become a billionaire and, probably still one of the top richest men in the world today. So, no, I think it takes a certain perseverance and awareness to, Tony Robbins, who I got listening to in the 91, said it. It's like success management. He used to use this term, success management. And I think, looking back on those early days, the people that were good at success managed their success well and didn't consume things that would lead them astray or mess up their lives, So I think there's a certain discipline that comes with a good business leader that's got to stay there. Back then, I probably did not think too much about like where these people were going to go. But now looking back, I see where so many of them went. And there's a lot of sad stories there. And there's a lot of very good stories there too.
There are. Money doesn't create the happiness, right? You do have to be more intentional than that. And we don't get to pick our end date, which unfortunately, Steve Jobs, it's been a long time now. You forget how long ago he passed away.
As we record this, we're talking just 3 days after he died. He died 3 days. The anniversary was 3 days ago.
Yeah, I saw that pop up. But when did he die? In 2000?
It's been a while. I mean,
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
But all of those people were extremely focused as far as what they wanted. They were driven, and that's what they focused on, their particular things. They weren't, like you said, chasing riches. They were more so interested in doing those types of things.
And they were, for the most part, all of them, they were very good planners. Paul Allen and Gates were very good planners. Stephen Jobs would bring everybody in every quarter and he'd say, what are we going to focus on? And they'd list 10 or 20 things that they could focus on. And he'd say, now circle 2. And people would come up to him and say, no, Steve, we got to do this. He said, no, pick 2. We're picking 2. We're going to focus in on 2. And, a lot of companies just try to do too much. So something that there's another great book. It's called The One Thing. I forget who wrote it, but he says, focus on only one thing. I actually met that author when I lived on Martha's Vineyard. Yep. There you go.
Yeah.
Yep. So I take a similar approach, and we'll maybe get into that today, but I work on 4 things at once. You look back at those planners, they all, started out with a plan. Even Paul Allen and Gates, sat there and said, okay, what's our vision? You probably have the book on yourself, Start With Why. I mean, that goes all the way back to, the Stoics talked about, do something you love. But, when Gates sat down and Paul Allen, Gates said, I want a computer on every desk. And Paul Allen said, no, I want one in every home. And they were arguing. And you know what their original byline, their original core purpose was? A computer in every home and on every desk.
They came together.
They came together and they came up with their core purpose. And that was their core purpose. That was, they lived by that. So I think so many companies just don't put together a good strategic plan initially. And then, it's fact that only 35% of companies have a plan each year.
And I'm sure most people don't have a plan for themselves either.
That's correct. And part of your plan has to be that too. I think there's this real strong need for work-life balance that some of these people just totally obliterate their relationships, or, they miss their kids growing up and whatnot. And later on in life, that became a very important component of my life, where I wouldn't travel on Fridays, Saturdays, or Sundays. I was at home on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. There were a few times I had to make an exception for a trade show or something, but I really stuck to that, to be with my family on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So, and not work, if all possible.
This episode of Richer Soul is sponsored by the Profit Answer Man podcast. If you're a business owner who wants to scale and grow, increase profits, or want to have strategic conversations around your financials, then check out the podcast. You'll learn how to work less, increase cash flow, increase profits, and build reserves to help you weather storms. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. Congratulations. I'm with you on that. And I think a lot of people I don't know if people just don't realize they can say no, or don't realize the importance, or they just think it's going to be tomorrow. But people don't do that. Now, the first part is have a plan, but then there's the second part, right?
Oh, yeah. The most important part. So 35% of companies have some semblance of a plan. Some of them are very good. Some of them aren't the best plan, but it's so important to have a plan. Even a poor plan is better than having no plan at all. Okay. So let's just agree on that. So 35% of companies have a plan, but every 2 years, Harvard Business goes out and researches, and Comes back the same time. 81 to 85% of companies fail at executing their plan. Now let's do the math real quick, okay? That's 35 people have plans, 35 companies have plans, and only 80% of those. That means we're giving a benefit there. That means only 7 companies are going to succeed at having a plan and executing their plan out of 100. How do you change that? First, set aside some time to plan for 2026. An hour a week for 8 weeks. You have a pretty decent plan by the time 2026 comes. But then the challenge, this is when the planning is actually the easy part. The execution becomes the challenge. And I had a great mentor, Bob Trenkamp. He's no longer with us. Brought us up to Kennebunkport, Maine for a 3-day planning session. Wow, we had a great plan. We all came back to our headquarters. And because Bob had hired great people around him, he just figured we'd all go off and execute our plan. That didn't happen. He didn't check in with us on a weekly basis. And Bob, sorry, I'm throwing you under the bus here, but that's what it was. He didn't follow up with each leader on a weekly basis and check in with the progress against that plan. And by checking in weekly, and it doesn't have to be one of these long 3, 4, 5-hour meetings. This can be a weekly leadership team meeting where you're going through your 4 most significant plans, driving growth and success over that next quarter, and check in and see what's working. And then the team collectively help on the components that are not working. It's not a beat up session. It's a session where we just say, "Oh, you're doing a great job, Rocky. Congratulations. You're up to speed on your revenue growth." And you turn to the next guy, "Jim, you're a little bit behind. What can we do to get this back on track? What can I do to help you? What can the team help?" 45 minutes. Every one of my direct clients, I hold a weekly meeting with. Every one of them. I hold a weekly meeting with them. I cap it at 50 minutes. I block out an hour, but it ends at 50 minutes. There have been times it'll run over, but I really try to get through all the big projects in those 50 minutes. And that's what companies need to do. They don't need me. What they need is just a plan, and they need to do a weekly check-in, set aside that time. So execution becomes a challenge. And there's more to executing than just this check-in, but that's where it starts. It starts right there.
It does. I'm a big fan of the book Traction, and a big part of Traction is the weekly meeting where basically you're like, "Hey, did you do it? Did you not do it? Thumbs up, thumbs down. What are the problems? Let's fix the problems and let's get back to moving." And Traction's similar to Rockefeller Habits, this same kind of concept. There's tons of different systems, but all kind of the same of you have to have the check-in. You can't abdicate authority, which means we had a plan. You can't assume like that person did that it's going to get done. You actually have to check in and say, did it occur? Trust and verify. And then if it's not going according to plan, you have to pivot and make a change. And what I have found is yearly plans aren't so great. And here's what I mean by that. Most people then spend January working on the plan, and then they forget about it till November. So if you set a quarterly plan,
always quarterly,
and what I do for me is I set quarterly plans, but each quarter has a theme, and the themes add up for the year. So, hey, this quarter we're focusing here. These are the goals. This quarter we might be focusing here. Here are the goals. And then together they add up towards that, and constantly measuring.
Well, I agree with you. What I try to do is set 4 themes. We go back to Albert Humphrey, 1960, MIT. He created the SWOT analysis: strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. Okay. There's a flaw there. I like going through the strengths. I like going through the weaknesses. And then you start to make a list of all your opportunities. And then threats. You never guess the threats right. Oh, let's plan we're going to be hit by a hurricane. Oh, let's plan we're going to get a virus that causes a whole economy to shut down. Let's plan and, we got a new president and the tariffs just wiped out our industry. So whatever it might be, it's really hard to guess your threat accurately, right? So just forget threats for now. Strength, weaknesses, trends. Look at your trends. And then what's the biggest obstacle you face? Okay. Now, if you do 4 projects every quarter, your first one's a sure bet. You know why? It's aligned with your strength. So maybe we're real strong in whatever it is. Fresh flowers. We're a local grocery store, but people come in because they love our flowers. Yeah, we sell beef and we sell other stuff, but let's focus on the flowers because first off, we make a lot of money. People stop in our store to pick up those flowers. That's our strength. That's a sure bet, right? We're going to win with that one. So then let's eliminate or mitigate a weakness. What's our biggest weakness right now? Okay. Then what trend is occurring out there in our industry? What trend is occurring in our geographic region? What trend is occurring in our country? And look at the trends occurring. And then what's your biggest obstacle you face? And come up with 4 projects, 4 areas you're going to focus on. So you're going to get stronger and win. The strength's a sure bet. You're going to eliminate or mitigate a weakness. And you're going to try every quarter to find another trend to ride. Now you're going to find, sort of like with the trends, it's challenging. It's going to be like sort of being out in the ocean and you're waiting for a wave to come and you start paddling, you're paddling. Oh, that one stunk. And the next quarter, oh, this trend looks really good. Let me jump up. Boom, splash. Another terrible wave. Oh, here comes another trend. Oh my gosh, it took me all the way into shore. Let's intensify that trend and run the same trend the next quarter. When you find those magical trends, that's what really drives the growth. And then the obstacle, the final one. What obstacle are you facing? So I run what's called a swaddle 4. It's, basically a modification of an old school technology that's an old school philosophy that's proven and been used for many years, the SWAT. But I get rid of, opportunities because if you just make a list of opportunities, you're always going to cherry pick the ones that look exciting or good. I want an opportunity tied to one, to your strength, because you're strong there already. One that's going to wipe out a weakness. One that's going to ride a potential trend. And the final one sometimes takes longer than a quarter. Maybe we're a brick manufacturer in New Zealand. And I did coach a brick manufacturing company in New Zealand, so I'm using that as an example. And they needed to increase their output. The only way to do that was to build another factory, right? So it took them 1.5 years to find the facility, retrofit it, and open it up. That was an obstacle they faced. They could not increase production until they had. So that was a major obstacle, right? So sometimes the obstacle project can run on for more than a quarter, but then you're always looking at these 4 projects. So that's my approach.
No, that makes sense. One of the big trends right now that everyone is talking about is AI.
AI isn't a trend. It's table stakes. It's like being in 1975 in your pharmacy and you haven't purchased a fax machine yet. And all your prescriptions are coming in from the doctors with a fax machine. It's like being a television manufacturer and not building smart TV technology into your television, right? Every company should look and see how can we use AI to make us more cost efficient. And AI could work into any one of those 4 projects we just talked about, right? But AI is part of us now. It's like if you were a business in 1920, you had to advertise in the yellow pages. But if you didn't own a telephone, you were in trouble, right? So AI is just part of what we are today. Businesses that are not embracing AI today are like my grandfather that refused to buy a cell phone, right? So that's my analogy on AI right now. But yes, leverage AI, and it is a trend.
How do people deal with that? Because the trend for AI was so fast. Things are getting faster and faster. How do we pivot, keep up? Like, I think people are getting blindsided.
Quarterly strategic planning. Quarterly strategic planning. If you did a plan in November of 2019, and I did do a plan in November 2019 for a company that I was running in New Zealand at that time. And I flew over to New Zealand in March. And on my way to New Zealand, everybody in the air, a lot of the Asian folks in the airports were wearing masks already. And I said to my wife, I said, why are all these people wearing masks? And we got to New Zealand, and lo and behold, watch TV, and there's a virus starting to emerge all over the world. That plan that I did in November of 2019 was garbage at that moment in time. Rip it in half, throw it out, start over. And I don't think people are sitting down every quarter and saying, what has changed? If you were a business that sat down for the last 12 quarters, surely AI would have come up at one of them. Surely AI would have come up at one of those quarterly strategic planning sessions. And maybe you didn't embrace it the first time. Maybe the CEO said, nah, we're not going to look at that. But the next quarter, you would have said, we got to do something with AI. So, it's the quarterly understanding that technology, you said it yourself, things are moving so fast.
So part of that problem then also becomes, how do you know which ones to ignore? Right. And I'll say that more on the social media side, because it always seems like, oh, there's this new social media platform. You have to be on this. And the majority of them don't make it. Like, how do you know, hey, this is a trend we need to put effort into versus this is not a trend. This is a fad. It's popping up quickly. It's going to die just as fast because, like you said, we can't hop after every wave or we're going to get mighty tired and distracted.
You're totally right. And it's always been a challenge for me to pick the right trends. We'll go back to Diligent Board Member Services. Started that company in 2003 with 6 other people. And we did electronic board books. Back then, board of directors were still getting all their board books, thick board books, 200 to 500 pages before a board meeting. They would leave those books on the plane. They would leave those books at a bar. They would ship a book to the director's house. They would ship a book to the director's place of business, and they'd ship a book to their seasonal summer house out in the Hamptons. And those books, there was no security. We're talking books like ExxonMobil or really detailed information that had to be secure. Sometimes military secrets, right? Had to be secure, but they're shipping these paper books all over the world. So it felt like a no-brainer. And, I said, this is going to be a great business to launch. And we started out, and I said, well, we're going to really make the directors' lives easier. So we started an ad campaign chasing directors. It took me 3 quarters to figure out that it wasn't the directors that needed us. The directors didn't want us because they were old folks, directors, but they were older. They were set in their ways. They were comfortable with their paper books. They didn't want to get their books on a computer. So now the trend was like, okay, we got to figure another way in the door. So we went after corporate secretaries and general counsels. We made their lives easier because they could prepare a book in half the amount of time. I remember being in the headquarters of ExxonMobil. They literally had the board books on the boardroom table, down the hall, collating it like that because they were manually collating these sections of the board book all over the halls of ExxonMobil corporate headquarters. And that's how they used to do it. So we made their lives so easy. And that was it. Then we said, we changed our whole advertising pitch overnight. Still wasn't quite working. Then we had the financial crisis of 2008. And all of a sudden, all the banks were being audited. First by Bush, then by Obama. And they started with the large banks. So now every bank wasn't just meeting for 2 hours and then going and playing golf and having dinner. They needed to look at their board packages. All the big companies were saying, no, we're going to wait because their stock had just fallen. So the trend was banks. It was a segment trend, right? So you talked about which service do I use? Do I use, X, or do I use YouTube, or this new chat channel that just came out? What do I use? Well, we found out that the banks were the hot trend, but we learned by experiment, right? So then I did every banking show there was, and we blew up like crazy. But then what was the next trend? This guy Jobs announced an iPad. So now board members didn't need to carry a big, thick, clumsy computer. They could carry an iPad to read their books. Another trend within our industry segment. So what trend to jump on? I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is you got to keep on looking every quarter at a different trend. And you'll know if, XYZ comm channel jumps out and it doesn't work, don't stick with it or park it to the side for now. At least you're a little bit knowledgeable on it, and go on to the next thing that looks like an emerging trend. Don't be afraid to change or adjust. And I'm not a big fan of big wholesale pivots, but you have to learn to pivot quickly, especially in this environment.
You do. I think people get discouraged. They try one thing and it doesn't work and they give up. How often do these things that you try work out?
At least once a year for me. So, because if you try 4 things in a year, right? Like, just think about if you're doing any research and you're watching what's going on within your industry segment. And now there's this thing called AI. You can actually say, what's going on in my industry? What's going on in the flower industry? What's going on you have a tool now that will help you even find these trends better. So I actually think it's maybe going to be easier to find these trends. But, when I look back over the years, businesses I've run, I usually have one trend that stands out a year where I can say, well, that one was a dud and that one was a winner. And these two were so-so. You will get that, but you're doing the research during your quarterly strategic planning. You talked about companies that do yearly plans. Once you do your first yearly plan, you don't have to revisit all of this stuff. You don't have to revisit your core purpose. You don't have to do a pest analysis every quarter. You don't have to do a 5C strategic competitive analysis every quarter. You might want to do it once a year or every other quarter, but you don't have to do all that. So what you do is you spend time working on those 4 projects that you're going to chase. And the easiest one is your strength, I think. Boom. It's very interesting when I do consulting. I say, okay, we're all done with strengths. Now tell me all your weaknesses. And the room goes to dead silence. Like, oh, surely you have some weaknesses. Or I love when you go into strengths and they say, oh, our people. Oh, I'm confident that your HR department hires terrible people. No, of course your strengths are your people. What is so strong about your people? Give me each person and tell me what their strength is, right? Just don't say, my people are our strengths. Right? That's not a thoughtful answer, in my opinion. Like, our people, of course your people. No, I hire stupid people. Of course your people are one of your strengths, right? So the weaknesses are very challenging. But if you and then the trends, spend some time on the trends. Understand what's going on in your company, in your country, in your county, in your geographic region, in your industry, in your stores.
Let's take a moment to look at that. Because you have a long history, what are you noticing, just big picture trends that are kind of going on at the moment?
I think we're going to go through a real challenging period in society in general in America. There was a book called The Third Wave written by Alvin Toffler in the 1980s. And he got it almost right. He got it almost right. But he didn't get this third wave totally right. And I believe that we're going to see within the next, and I'm not a doom and gloom guy. Believe me, I'm not a doom and gloom guy. But I think we're going to see high areas of unemployment. I think your unemployment numbers are going to grow. I think we're going to see a shift. Let's bring manufacturing back to the United States. It's only 8% of the total people are employed. I just bought a car and it was built by robots in the United States. It's built by robots. So, bringing back manufacturing, no matter what your political persuasion is, it doesn't much matter, because while it might be a positive thing, manufacturing is on a downward slide right now. It's going to be. So my fear, where I see the shift really going, is to more mom and pop shops, small entrepreneurs launching small businesses, more back almost to a cottage industry. If you go back to the third wave book, we had the agricultural age, and we had the industrial age. The industrial age was all run by big companies like the Rockefellers and the Goodriches and the, Goodyear Tire and Rubber and companies like that brought people into their factories and made them work for a minimum salary, lots of hours, and made lots of money. Well, I think it's going to have to shift the other way, where people are going to be working from their home. And there's going to be a lot of cottage industry. So I think there's going to be more entrepreneurs than ever before, because we're all going to be entrepreneurs. We're going to have to launch these little cottage businesses. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but
it does. If you go to a third world country, what you find is everyone is an entrepreneur.
yes.
And that is something that is missing in America. But yet you see it abundantly through a lot of those things. They create their own work with their own skills in their own way. And it's also funny because, unlike, let's say, Starbucks, right? It's the same everywhere you go and equally whatever. If it gets replaced by the local coffee guy, I can guarantee you everyone's going to have their coffee guy, right? And so it's going to be a fraction of the size of that location, but everyone's going to have their coffee guy. And this barista is going to do this kind of thing, and that one's going to do that kind of thing. And yeah, you'll see that. And the gig economy is partially there. The problem with the gig economy is I don't think most gig workers have any clue how to figure out their actual pay. They think they're making money. They're not. They have to actually sit down and do the calculations to see. And I would think, if you're doing DoorDash all the time, wouldn't you prefer, hey, I've got my DoorDash guy, and he won't be a DoorDash guy, but it'll be your delivery guy maybe, and he handles maybe a neighborhood, and he takes care of whatever amount of people, and this way he can run out and pick up and then do it all at once, or pick up all the groceries for that particular street and figure out how to make a business out of it. We'll see.
Yes.
We might be wrong, and that's okay, right?
Yeah, I think you're right on. That it's thing. I mean, the other day we were driving down the highway. My wife and I were coming back from Martha's Vineyard. She's in an art show up there, and I said, just look at how many Amazon trucks pass us in the next 10 minutes. We started to shout out, "There's one! There's one!" Did you ever play with your kids or anybody? Blue buggy, don't punch me. Like there's a buggy. Volkswagens, right? Amazon trucks every 2 or 3 minutes. So our economy is changing at such a rapid pace. The malls are not going to be the same as they were. They're already, you go into a mall and you see 5 or 6 stores papered up. Some malls totally shut down. Strip malls. 2 or 3 stores, shut up. I think we're going to face some amazing changes. I think it'll be a positive change in the long run, though. I really believe that there's a shift that's going to go on where you're going to see more entrepreneurs than ever before. And there's going to be a need and a want for them.
Interesting times that we do live in.
Yes.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's one truth about success you wish more people understood?
Well, one. You've asked me for one. So I'd have to say that learn to manage the success. I guess the other really big thing, and I know you said one, but I've always surrounded myself with really good people. And one of the things that, most strategic planning coaches will take you through your core values. When you do your interviewing, make sure you hire people that are aligned with your core values and aligned with your own personal core values as well, wherever possible. The people I've had to walk away from or terminate were sometimes very talented, but the underlying problem was they did not fit in with the team because they weren't aligned with my core values or the company's core values. So, we didn't talk a lot about core values, but I think that's a key component to that initial stage of planning.
And that is very, very true. What's one lesson that cost you a lot, but was worth every penny?
I had an investor. I was very reliant on an investor who was putting money into the company on a regular basis. And I was not rushing the company like I do most companies to being profitable and self-sustaining as quickly as enough as I should have. I became reliant on that one investor, and that company crashed and burned because when COVID happened, that investor was based in New Zealand. The New Zealand economy is still in a mess today. And, I overspent because I knew this money was always coming in every month. So try to minimize your reliance on outside investors.
That makes total sense.
Get it cash positive. That's my biggest mistake.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Don't drink. Seriously, I've seen, in industry, I've seen so many failures and losses due to people's addictions. I say if that's the one thing I could tell an 18-year-old would be, don't drink too much or don't drink at all if you can avoid it. And then the second piece of advice would be, I know you said one and I give you two. I think I've done that for every one of your answers. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
But it takes a high level of discipline to grow a business. You have to block out time blocks is what I use to make sure I get that one big thing that's got to get done. And you could hand anyone that book that you pulled off your shelf, the one thing. And if somebody can become disciplined on that one thing and get that one thing across the plate this week, and then move on to the next one thing the week after, be disciplined and try not to have too many pie platters, too many things spinning at once, but discipline. And discipline actually ties right back to drinking. I mean, if you're going to drink, be disciplined. If you're in a business meeting, you're having one drink and that's it. It takes discipline to be successful in business.
It does. It's a skill we don't teach, unfortunately. If people would like to learn more about you, your programs, how do they go about doing that?
Go to marcldaniels.com, marcldaniels.com. And I have a entrepreneur readiness assessment on that. It brings you through the 8 to 10 components of putting together a strategic plan. And when you go through that, it'll come back with a recommendation as to where you're strong, where you're weak, or if you're totally up the creek without a paddle, it'll also tell you that too. So it'll be really honest with you, and it will only take you 10 minutes, and you'll go through this readiness assessment, and it'll really help you focus in on what you need to focus in on for your business. My goal is to help as many as entrepreneurs as I can. I'd love to help thousands. So go do the readiness assessment quiz. It's free, and it'll help you help you focus in on what you really need to focus in my opinion.
And we'll put those in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rocky. It's been a real pleasure.
Sometimes the difference between success and struggle isn't the plan. It's the follow through. As Mark reminded us, great ideas mean nothing without consistent execution and the discipline to stay focused when distraction hits. That's literally me. I don't get distraction. I just keep showing up and doing the work. What about you? Are you checking in weekly, reviewing quarterly, and adjusting when life shifts? Or are your plans collecting dust? Remember, execution creates freedom. Do you know someone who would benefit from listening to this episode? Do me a favor, share it with them. Help them to take action. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.